Well, it's officially happening. The big news came out that Florida State now is scheduling an emergency meeting with their board tomorrow morning, Friday the 22nd, just a few days before Christmas. And it looks like they are expected to start the process of leaving the ACC. Now, this was always a formality, of course. We knew this was going to happen. The questions surrounding this situation regard how they're actually going to leave this terrible grant of rights, which they're locked into for over a decade, and who are the other schools going with them. Will the ACC try and reinvent themselves as a de facto mid-major conference? We've already seen them add 3 teams because they knew something like this was coming. I'm sure the money's just so ridiculous, but let's dive in to this article. FSU is expected to soon start the process of its long-discussed divorce from the ACC. The Seminoles Conference affiliation is at the center of a scheduled meeting on Friday, and the result of the meeting could produce a formal legal filing in what many describe as the first step to achieving an exit from the ACC's grant of rights agreement. The details around the specific legal step remain unclear, but legal experts say that the school could seek what's called a declaratory judgment action in an effort to get a judge to rule that the school is not bound to its contract with the ACC. The legal steps aim is the grant of rights, a legal document between the ACC, its members, and TV partner ESPN, binding the parties to one another through 2036. Any filing would presumably be made at a local court friendly to the school's interests. The maneuver comes less than a month after FSU became the first undefeated major conference champion to be left out. And I don't think it has a ton to do with that. I'm guessing FSU is kind of using this as an excuse like, oh my goodness, look at how weak the ACC is. We even won our conference championship, went undefeated throughout the entire season, had a good non-conference opponent in week 1. It actually is pretty crazy that FSU was in a Power 5 conference, went undefeated, and beat the Heisman Trophy winner in a non-conference game and still got left out. I agree they should have been left out. You have to add context to it with the Jordan Travis injury, but I think this is more so FSU saying, oh, we're going to use this as an excuse. Look how weak the ACC is, when in reality, if Jordan Travis was healthy, FSU would probably be the 3 seed behind Washington right now in the playoff. This had to do with Jordan Travis being injured and the backups coming in not looking good, but I do understand their frustration. This is why we're going to a 12-team playoff, but I would say FSU now is taking advantage of the fact that they were left out, and they're saying, look, this is ridiculous. We have to do something. We have to act quickly and leave this conference because it is dying. If we're undefeated and we win our conference championship and we still can't make the playoff in the ACC, it's pretty ridiculous, but the argument is very meaningless at this point, considering we're getting a 12-team playoff, and no matter how bad the ACC is, if there's an undefeated team from the ACC, of course they're going to make a 12-team playoff because of the amount of spots available. Now, when it comes to the other teams that could leave, where would Florida State go? Where would Clemson go? I've said for the longest time, and the recent stuff really doesn't back this up, but I don't think the recent stuff matters too much. I've said for the longest time, we know the SEC is obsessed with sticking in their footprint. They don't want to expand into California. They don't want to expand into the North. To me, right now, you look at the SEC, 2 teams below the Big Ten, it feels almost perfect for Clemson and FSU to go to the SEC. They feel like SEC teams to me. Now, if you look at the recent rumors and the stuff coming out about FSU, it doesn't add up. It seems like FSU more likely to go to the Big Ten, but all of this doesn't matter right now. This is really the first step for FSU to try and legally challenge this and not have to pay some just absurd exit fee, and you'd possibly be looking at 4 or 6 total teams leaving the ACC, depending, and then the ACC would turn into this kind of mid-major conference because they would still have SMU, Stanford, Cal coming in. So let's say you lose 4 teams or 6 teams, you're still adding 3 teams back. They're trying to keep it to where it's not a situation like the Pac-12, where the Pac-12 kept waiting. They didn't take anyone from the Big 12. When the Big 12 was exposed after Texas and Oklahoma had announced they were leaving and really kicked off the entire realignment back a few years ago, a few summers ago, they're not trying to make the same mistake the Pac-12 did. Now the Pac-12 is on the verge of not existing. I mean, next year it's not going to exist. It's a Pac-2. The Mountain West is going to be a lot more powerful than what's left of the Pac-12. So the ACC right now, I think it's going to be cannibalized down to possibly about 7 or 8 teams, depending on what North Carolina, possibly Virginia do. There's several teams we're not exactly sure. I think North Carolina is a phenomenal fit for the Big Ten, and they would also take Duke, I would say, depending on how big these leagues want to get, possibly both the SEC and the Big Ten getting up to 20 teams. And then there is also the rumor and the thought, could we see another potential merger? I know there's probably been 60 rumors of a merger now between conferences, and it never works out. Logistically, it's a nightmare. You have to split the TV money with more teams. It doesn't make any sense. But the idea is that the Big 12 is really looking at this situation and realizing, I mean, next year there's already the rumor and narrative that the Big 12 is going to get one team in the playoff, the 12-team playoff, because the conference is so average. Could the Big 12 look at an ACC that's watered down and say, let's do a merger, let's take your best teams? There's been a rumor that they might try and do that. Although I don't know if that would actually happen, because at that point the ACC would be a lot less valuable if they do lose their big schools like Miami, like FSU, like North Carolina. All of those heavy hitters possibly would be leaving. You can see in the latest realignment wave, the ACC gained the 3 teams that I talked about. You had FSU, North Carolina, and Clemson voting against the addition. So yes, FSU, North Carolina, Clemson, if FSU can get out of this grant of rights, those teams would be absolutely gone. You'd probably have 3 or 4 other teams gone just because the grant of rights is so bad, and you've got really good academics involved with some of those ACC schools and good basketball programs as well, especially with a program like Virginia. I'm not exactly sure how much in demand some of these teams would be in the SEC and the Big Ten. Could they possibly go to the Big 12? It's something to watch. But either way, certainly it would be those 3 teams at the forefront because they voted against the additions. They want to try and make it easier on themselves when they leave. If you add Stanford, Cal, SMU, it makes it harder to leave the conference just because Stanford, Cal, SMU possibly will be able to vote against those teams leaving. But either way, I think no matter what, this is something that's going to happen. I mean, let's understand something right now. We're sitting towards the end of 2023, you can even call it the start of 2024. This is a TV deal through 2036. Do we really think the lawyers, in kind of a sweetheart case with a nice local judge, do we really think within 2 or 3 years they're not going to somehow get out of this terrible deal? I mean, the TV money is just so ridiculous. It's so bad. And it's a situation where, yeah, on paper they agreed to it. It locked them in through 2036. It guaranteed they were going to have their big games, the ACC's big games, on ESPN. But obviously we've seen what's been done with the Big Ten and the SEC and the massive amount of TV money that teams like Maryland are getting, teams like Northwestern are getting over the next decade, which is a lot more than some of these big-time ACC schools, and they're just not gonna put up with it. You can see there is a precedent for a settlement, so a possible settlement, but this is a little bit different. It says this year the Big 12 and its TV partners agreed to a settlement for Oklahoma and Texas to leave the grant of rights 1 year early, and it was a $50 million penalty for each school for Oklahoma and Texas. Now, it made sense for Oklahoma and Texas to get out as soon as possible because the money's so much better in the SEC. The ACC grant of rights includes similar language to that document. However, FSU would be leaving with as many as 10 years remaining on the contract. So it looks like the settlement would be almost $500 million. And I would imagine they would be trying to lower that as much as possible through some type of legal jargon. But yes, you can say there's a precedent for it, but not really. If you're talking about Texas and Oklahoma leaving 1 year early versus FSU trying to get out of a deal that has 13 or 12 years left on it, it's really not comparable at all. I mean, maybe you could say if there was 3 or 2 years left on it, but 12 years versus 1 year in terms of leaving, that's just not comparable. That would be in addition to the $120 million owed to the league in a separate exit fee. So there's a lot of money possibly that FSU would have to pay, $500 million. Would that be worth it to join the Big Ten? You would have to do the math on that. They're going to have to get that lowered, though, if they want to try and leave. And then there is also the idea maybe actually, I'm not sure if that exists anymore. Originally, before they added the 3 new teams, it was like, oh, if you get 7 or 8 teams to agree to rip up the grant of rights, it possibly could be completely nullified. I'm not sure that was ever an actual thing. Now, I'm guessing it doesn't matter because they added 3 more teams, and obviously SMU, Cal, and Stanford are not going to want to rip up the grant of rights. They're just happy to be in a Power 5 conference at this point. So this is all moving. I'm sure it's going to take a while to sort all of it out, but this is kind of a big step for FSU, calling an emergency meeting, trying to use, I don't want to say the momentum, but just the situation regarding FSU, a team that obviously is worth more in terms of TV money, in terms of ratings than what they're being paid. They're trying to leverage the fact that the ACC is down, the fact that they got left out of the playoff as an undefeated Power 5 champ, and say, look, this conference is pathetic. We can gain support. People will understand it is ridiculous that an undefeated team gets left out, even though I really don't think that has anything to do with it because of the situation surrounding the 4-team playoff that will be expanding to a 12-team playoff, and also FSU dealing with a pretty crazy quarterback injury. Their backups did not look good when they filled in. Also, you have the funny idea, FSU saying, well, if we were in the SEC, we would never get left out. If we were in the Big Ten, we never get left out. You wouldn't have made it if you would have been in those conferences because you wouldn't have been undefeated, in my opinion. In your conference championship game, if you have to face a Michigan or an Alabama with a backup quarterback, I don't think you're winning that. So it is kind of funny. They're saying, well, if we were in another conference, undefeated, we would be in the playoff, but you wouldn't be undefeated. You'd have a much tougher conference schedule. But that's neither here nor there. Really, none of these arguments matter because we're not going to deal with this razor thin, we have to leave a 1-loss conference champ out of the playoff or an undefeated conference champ out of the playoff. It doesn't exist anymore. That argument, there's no argument for that because the 12-team playoff is coming next year. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.